Okay, so hi. I was going to jump in and just start right at chapter 11 because we did chapter 10, I don't know, like 6 years ago. Is that time? But before I jump into that, I will just say your good friend Mike Bevel, host of Footnotes, where I read one chapter of Middlemarch a day, has some depression issues and also some anxiety issues. And it turns out a pandemic is not the best time to have those. Not that there are great times to have those, but there are times when you can have those. And then there are things, I'm also sweating because I took a shower for you guys. Anyway, yeah, I couldn't do it. I couldn't sit down and talk to anyone because I was having to talk to so many people for work, and then just everything sort of hit me at once. What the pandemic is doing, what we're doing, what the world is doing, and I took a break. But I feel better today. I felt a little better yesterday too. So I think I may be starting to come out of whatever it was that I was in. I'm going to sweat through this shirt too. So welcome to my OnlyFans, where I will sweat through everything and then become see-through. It won't become see-through. I promise. This is very family friendly, except sometimes I say fuck. But some families say fuck, and that is fine. Anyway, let's go ahead and see if I can remember. Well, I mean, I've marked my place. We're at chapter 11. I kind of remember what happened. Let's read together the last sentence of chapter 10, the last paragraph of chapter 10, and then move into chapter 11. Miss Brooke, however, was not again seen by either of those gentlemen. I guess Mr. Lydgate and maybe Mr. Chichley, who I don't remember who that is. I hope you do. These gentlemen under her maiden name. Not long after that dinner party, she had become Mrs. Rosamund and was on her way to Rome. So just because I'm feeling chatty, because I haven't talked to you in a while. So Mrs. is mistress, right? That's it, Mrs. And she's the mistress of, not mistress in the sexy way, but sort of like Mistress Quickly in a Shakespeare play that I know a character from, but don't know the title to, and that's my education. But so she's the idea is that she's the mistress of Rosamund, which means she takes care of him. Like she is the one who will manage his household. She will manage all of those things. And then, as ways lead on to way, Mrs. started to, I mean, the term became more and more politicized. We ended up with Ms., which was a way because people would just assume if you were a woman in public, you had to be married because who lets you out of the house if not your husband? And so it would just be natural to call you Mrs. whatever your last name was. And if you weren't married and they called you that would be weird because now you're mom. You're your own mom. Isn't there? I think there's an Anne Sexton poem that says, "We are all our own mothers," or something like that. It might be in the poem where she says, "We must all eat beautiful women." Oh, and then in Suspiria, Tilda Swinton's character says, "We must break the nose of every beautiful thing." None of this has anything to do with Middlemarch. I just think it's interesting. She's now in charge of Rosamund. That's who's taking care of him. More sweat. It's really hot. It's hot here. I'm also a little. It's weird that I'm nervous because I'm literally alone upstairs. There's no one up here, not even a cat. My brother's at work, and it's just been a while. And I think I don't know. So let's start with chapter 11 because we've done enough of this together. We start with a quotation by Ben Jonson. But deeds and language such as men do use, and persons such as comedy would choose, when she would show an image of the times and sport with human follies, not with crimes. Lydgate, in fact, was already conscious of being fascinated by a woman strikingly different from Miss Brooke. He did not in the least suppose that he had lost his balance and fallen in love, but he had said of that particular woman, "She is grace itself. She ought to produce the effect of exquisite music." Plain women he regarded, as he did the other severe facts of life, to be faced with philosophy and investigated by science. Yeah, that is that is a truism today in the year of our Lord 2020. That attractive people garner more. They get more of our attention, which means sometimes they get more of our compassion. And sometimes they can get more of our rancor too, just because we pay more attention to things that are attractive. Symmetrical is a good way. And plain people we tend to ignore, which is one of the reasons why Jane Eyre is such a revolutionary novel. Nobody's made a good movie of it yet because they keep casting beautiful women as Jane Eyre. And Jane Eyre is plain. She is not extraordinarily beautiful. And that's the whole point. And by the way, Rochester is not Michael Fassbender. That's his name, right? Remember that movie where he was a sex addict? I don't either, because I forced it out of my mind. Plain women he regarded as he did the other severe facts of life, to be faced with philosophy and investigated by science. But Rosamund Vincy, and I think Rosamund Vincy, I think she's a mayor's daughter. Let's double check my notes. Yes, he's the newly elected mayor and also a manufacturer. That's what you want. You want a guy with a business to be mayor of your town, because he's certainly not going to govern in his own self-interest. No, he's going to have the interest of the town in mind. All right. But Rosamund Vincy seemed to have the true melodic charm. And when a man has seen the woman whom he would have chosen if he had intended to marry speedily, his rewind, no editing. Yeah, I had to do a lot of editing lately for work on this program from Adobe, who's not sponsoring this. It's called Adobe Premiere. It is fussy. My computer is too slow for it. And it is daunting. Like, there are more buttons than I know what to do with. My ears are extraordinarily large. Almost look like a Ferengi. She would Ferengi and do the cha-cha. But Rosamund Vincy seemed to have the true melodic charm. And when a man has seen the woman who he would have chosen if he had intended to marry speedily, his remaining a bachelor will usually depend on her resolution rather than on his. Lydgate believed that he should not marry for several years, not marry until he had trodden out a good, clear path for himself away from the broad road, which was quite ready-made. He had seen Miss Vincy above his horizon almost as long as it had taken Mr. Casaubon to become engaged and married. But this learned gentleman was possessed of a fortune. He had assembled his voluminous notes and had made that sort of reputation which precedes performance, often the larger part of a man's fame. I think part of what's being talked about here is Lydgate feels like he has nothing to offer the world. Like, maybe it's almost this thought of, what right do I have to a wife at this point when I've done nothing to earn it? Yeah, do we think about that for a little bit? What do we think about that? In the words of my nemesis, Lin-Manuel Miranda, love is love is love. Anyway, he had seen Miss Vincy above his horizon almost as long as it had taken Mr. Gazabon to become engaged and married. But this learned gentleman was possessed of a fortune. He had assembled his voluminous notes and had made that sort of a reputation which precedes performance, often the larger part of a man's fame. He took a wife, as we have seen, to adorn the remaining quadrant of his course, and be a little moon that would cause hardly a calculable perturbation. I'm glad we don't have that word anymore. I'm glad no one says that word anymore, because I have trouble saying it, and that's the kind of person I am. That's the kind of person we all are, actually. When we don't know how to say something, like they, or whatever pronouns people want, we get scared, and we don't want to have to say it ever. So we'd like to just get that word away. Holy macanoli. Okay. Again, you can always send me money for this kind of sexy content. Family channel. He took a wife, as we have seen, to adorn the remaining quadrant of his course, and be a little moon that would cause hardly a calculable perturbation. But Lydgate was young, poor, ambitious. He had his half-century before him instead of behind him, and he had come to Middlemarch bent on doing many things that were not directly fitted to make his fortune or even secure him a good income. To a man, under such circumstances, taking a wife is something more than a question of adornment, however lightly he may rate this. And Lydgate was disposed to give it the first place among wifely functions. To his taste, guided by a single conversation, here was the point on which Miss Brooke would be found wanting, notwithstanding her undeniable beauty. She did not look at things from the proper feminine angle. The society of such women was about as relaxing as going from your work to teach the second form, instead of reclining in a paradise with sweet laughs for bird notes and blue eyes for a heaven. So, sorry, we're going to interrupt again. And this is going to be a longer video just because it's been a while since I've talked to you, and I am both, like I said, anxious, but also kind of excited, and I've missed doing this. I want to talk a little bit about 19th century marriage, which is also, in a sense, talking about marriage up to the 19th century. So marriage is a legal contract. So a man has, in a sense, purchased a wife by giving her a ring. Now, it's a two-way contract because the bride also brings a dowry. So what we think of today as marriage is just any two people, unless you're gay or trans, getting married easily in a backyard, sometimes by someone who got ordained on the internet, because why not? But back then, marriage there was a lot more at stake, and it wasn't easy, and it was a big decision to make because you were taking on this financial, I'm just talking through burps now like John Mulaney, but I'm much older, so I've been doing it for longer. Maybe you haven't noticed, but just now I did. Do you hear the fly buzz? I heard a fly buzz when I died. I'm not dead, because I'm wearing different clothes and I'm sweating. I don't think ghosts sweat. If I were a ghost hunter, the first thing I would check for is sweat. The first thing I would check for, like if I saw a person who I thought was a ghost, I would ask them, were you wearing these clothes yesterday? Because if they were, well, it could be me, because I do that when I'm depressed. But also ghosts wear clothes, the same clothes all the time. Like they don't have a wardrobe, they just always appear. I'm very scientific about ghosts. We are talking about marriage. And So what is sort of a simple, fun lark where any two people in a casino or in someone's backyard can get married, and it's not a big deal. And it doesn't have the same connotation. It also doesn't have the same weight that it did when it was much more of a big deal, when reputations could be ruined by divorce, which was incredibly difficult to get, both because of religious reasons. What God has joined together, let no man tear asunder, put asunder, turn asunder. So many prepositions. Who can tell? Wait, are those prepositions? Prepositions are anything a squirrel can do to a tree. That's what I learned in school. And that is why America is #1 in everything, including coronavirus cases. Not to get political. Back to marriage, which is political, because who you marry, how you marry, what that transaction meant, what land holdings you got, like there's just a lot that goes into it. So when we read 19th century novels, when we read 18th, 17th, 16th century novels or diaries or anything like that, we need to readjust what marriage means, because it doesn't necessarily mean what we think it does. And you don't have to be in love with your husband. Famously in The Princess of Cleves, it's almost gauche to be in love with your husband. You have a husband, but you also have a lover. So marriage is complicated. And someone like Lydgate is not necessarily being like somebody from like a guy from an 80s movie who refuses to marry and fall in love because he doesn't want to interrupt his man lifestyle. But it's more, he really thinks, I don't have much to offer yet to a woman. There's another book that I may read in this series, provided I finish this one. I can't guarantee I'm going to finish this one. Remember that long break I took? We're in the middle of it right now. But there is a book called New Grub Street. And there's a man in there who has wanted to marry this woman. And they can never marry. They're deeply in love. They're committed to each other. They cannot marry. Cannot afford to. So where did we go? Certainly nothing at present could seem much less important to Lydgate than the return of Miss Brooks's mind, or to Miss Brooke, than the qualities of a woman who had attracted this young surgeon. But anyone watching keenly the stealthy convergence of human lots sees a slow preparation of effects from one life on another, which tells like a calculated irony on the indifference or the frozen stare with which we look at our unintroduced neighbor. Destiny stands by sarcastic with our dramatis personae folded in her hand. You can usually tell when I'm at the end of a paragraph because I'll make that the point to look up at the camera, knowingly, like I've said something profound. Old provincial society had its share of this subtle movement, had not only its striking downfalls, its brilliant young professional dandies who ended by living up an entry with the drab and 6 children for their establishment, but also those less marked vicissitudes which are constantly shifting the boundaries of social intercourse and begetting new consciousness, just consciousness, of interdependence. Some slipped a little downward, some got higher footing. People denied aspirates, gained wealth, and fastidious gentlemen stood for boroughs. Some were caught in political currents, some in ecclesiastical, and perhaps found themselves surprisingly grouped in consequence, while a few personages or families that stood with rocky firmness amid all this fluctuation were slowly presenting new aspects in spite of solidity, and altering with the double change of self and beholder. Municipal town and rural parish gradually made fresh threads of connection, gradually, as the old stocking gave way to the savings bank and the worship of the solar guinea became extinct. Solar guinea, the coin, that's all we need to know. While squires and baronets and even lords who had once lived blamelessly afar from the civic mind gathered the faultiness of closer acquaintanceship. Settlers too came from distant counties, some with an alarming novelty of skill, others with an offensive advantage in cunning. In fact, much the same sort of movement and mixture went on in Old England as we find in older Herodotus, who also, in telling what had been, thought it well to take a woman's lot for his starting point. Though Io, as a maiden apparently beguiled by attractive merchandise, was the reverse of Miss Brooke, and in this respect perhaps bore more resemblance to Rosamund and Vincy, who had excellent taste in costume, with that nymph-like figure and pure blondness, which gave largest range to choice in the flow and color of drapery. And just making sure I'm not revealing a secret post-it note with something to myself that I wouldn't want you to see. Continuing to sweat. Should I talk a little bit about what happened here? So I meant to trim my beard, which I did, and I did a fine job. And I thought, well, then I could probably just trim my hair, but I forgot to put the weird little clip thing back on the trimmer, and just went droop. Now, here's something interesting. Did I forget to put the clipper thing on? Or did I do it on purpose because I was in a state? It's a great question. I don't know the answer to it. It's probably both. I probably did forget. I probably also saw, and I probably also said, whatever, it's fine. My head is not too terribly misshapen. What if the whole rest of the video was just me giving you different angles of this? I won't do it, because this is a long chapter and this video is going to be 9 hours long. But these things made only part of her charm. She was admitted to be the flower of Mrs. Lemon's school, the chief school in the county, where the teaching included all that was demanded in the accomplished female, even to extras such as the getting in and out of a carriage, which would be difficult, by the way, in this time, just because of the voluminous skirts. Like, how do you get out of a carriage and not look like you are a giant ball of clothing falling out? Or was it a Carol Burnett? There's a Carol Burnett sketch where she comes down in the drapes. Yes, I know, everyone knows. But I think there's also one where she sits down in the hoop. No, maybe it was a Happy Days or Laverne and Shirley. I'm going to stop trying to remember. Anyway, women's dress is very difficult. But that's coming from a guy. So I would actually not listen to me about women's clothing, and I would listen to clothing historians who will tell you how difficult clothing could be. Because things are difficult to us because we don't do them. They may not have been difficult to the people who use them all the time. That's what I will say. Like drag seems very difficult to me, like getting all of that costuming and everything. Whereas to a drag performer, it's what they need to do. They're used to it. There may be some complications, but it's sort of built into the idea of drag. So I would not listen to me about drag either, except this. I prefer my drag to be grotesque. Like I want a divine more than I want a man that can pass as a stunningly beautiful woman and lip sync. That's just me. Like I want something of the absurdity of it. I think drag at its best is this interesting commentary on what we force women to look like and be like. Like they exaggerate all these things, not to mock it, I think. Maybe some are mocking it. I don't know everybody's intention. But I think at its best, it's saying, you know, this is, here's the ideal of femininity taken to its extreme. Boy, is that the face of Christ in my armpit. Okay. Mrs. Lemon herself had always held up the getting, no. Mrs. Lemon herself had always held up Miss Vincy as an example. No pupil, she said, exceeded that young lady for mental acquisition and propriety of speech, while her musical execution was quite exceptional. We cannot help the way in which people speak of us. Yeah, let's remember that, right? We cannot help the way people speak about us. That's none of our business. Well, I guess it would be our business if it starts to affect our personal and professional life, but we can't stop them from saying it in the first place. People are going to say what they're going to say, and what you do with it is what you do with it. We cannot help the way in which people speak of us, and probably if Mrs. Lemon had undertaken to describe Juliet or Imogen, these are Shakespeare characters, these heroines would be not, okay, I'm just going to make up words. If Mrs. Lemon had undertaken to describe Juliet or Imogen, these heroines would not have seemed poetical. The first vision of Rosamund would have been enough with most judges to dispel any prejudice excited by Mrs. Lemon's praise. Lydgate could not be long in Middlemarch without having that agreeable vision, or even without making the acquaintance of the Vincy family. For though Mr. Peacock, whose practice he had paid something to enter on, had not been their doctor, Mrs. Vincy not liking the lowering system adopted by him. You know what I don't know is what the lowering system means. And Norton doesn't care if you know either. What does the lowering system mean? Let's find out together, because I'm on a computer while I'm doing this. So let's go to Google. Oh, can I do this? Oh, guys, I think I'm about to do something crazy. I'm going to share my screen. Perfect. And now we are going to open Google. This is Terence McNally. This is Edward Albee. They tried dating, and McNally just found Albee impossible to be with. Albee, McNally was a little more comfortable being out and about his sexuality and just about the coreness of who he was. And Albee struggled with that a lot, to the point where even though Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf is high camp, it's a drama, but it's a high camp drama. Albee would never let an all-male production happen. He also wasn't fond of a production that was going to cast a black guy as Nick. So anyway, I just wanted to explain what you're seeing here. Let's type in the lowering system. The lowering system medicine seems like a good hit. Oh. So Richard Lower was a physician, so the lowering system is his physician. And I'm glad we looked this up, because I thought maybe they like lowered people into something, the way you might dunk a witch. Oh, sorry, I should probably be, I'm just assuming you're reading this page along with me. Maybe you're not. Lower was born in St. You don't need to know where he was born. He did a lot of work with blood transfusions. Maybe she just isn't. Oh, so Lower showed it was possible for blood to be transferred from animal to animal and from animal to man. Intravenously xenotransfusion. In November 1667, he worked with Edmund King, another student of Willis, to transfuse sheep's blood into a man who was mentally ill. Why? Notice there's no link under into a man who was mentally ill to take us to the Wikipedia page for that guy to find out how that went. I don't think it probably went well. Why would you put sheep's blood in a madman? He was interested in advancing science, but also believed the man could be helped by either the infusion of fresh blood or by the removal of old blood. Fresh blood from anything, old blood, ugh. It was difficult to find people who would agree to be transfused, but an eccentric scholar, Arthur Koga, consented, and the procedure was carried out by Lower and King before the Royal Society on the 23rd of November, 1667. Transfusion gathered some popularity in France and Italy, but medical and theological debates arose, resulting in transfusion being prohibited in France. Now, Jehovah's Witnesses, this is not in here, I'm just telling you, have a prohibition against accepting blood products because of the way that they read certain passages in Leviticus about the consuming of blood. And so a transfusion is sort of seen as literal consuming of blood. Boy, do they not agree with the Catholics in their transubstantiation. Anyway, look what we learned together. We learned about the lowering system. Let's get back to stop share. Let's get back to the book. That doesn't count as an edit, by the way, because we did it all in one take and I didn't stop and do anything, but I did learn that I could do that, and maybe I'll do that more going forward, especially if I have to prove something or if I want to show how I got to a conclusion. Let's see. For though Mr. Peacock, whose practice he had paid something to enter on, had not been their doctor, Mrs. Vincy not liking the lowering system adopted by him, he had many patients among their connections and acquaintances. Now, it's interesting, in the book, she doesn't capitalize lowering. It really does. So again, without a footnote, and maybe my Google search was wrong also, by the way. It's a mystery. One of you out there knows it, or somebody out there knows it, and maybe you'll tell me. I would love to know. If you know more about the lowering system, tell an adult. He had many patients among their connections and acquaintances, for who of any consequence in Middlemarch was not connected or at least acquainted with the Vincys. They were old manufacturers and had kept a good house for 3 generations, in which there had naturally been much intermarrying with neighbors, more or less decidedly genteel. Mr. Vincy's sister had made a wealthy match in accepting Mr. Bulstrode, who, however, as a man not born in the town and altogether of dimly known origin, that's something we should probably pay attention to. Dimly known origin often is code for Jewish in these books. Like someone with a mysterious and exotic background ends up either being having some African blood in them or Jewish. Dimly known origin was considered to have done well in uniting himself with a real Middlemarch family. On the other hand, Mr. Vincy had descended a little, having taken an innkeeper's daughter. But on this side, too, there was a cheering sense of money, for Mrs. Vincy's sister had been second wife to rich old Mr. Featherstone, and had died childless years ago, so that her nephews and nieces might be supposed to touch the affections of the widower. And it happened that Mr. Bulstrode and Mr. Featherstone, 2 of Peacock's most important patients, had, from different causes, given an especially good reception to his successor, who had raised some partisanship as well as discussion. Mr. Wrench, medical attendant to the Vincy family, very early had grounds for thinking lightly of Lydgate's professional discretion, and there was no report about him which was not retailed at the Vincys, where visitors were frequent. Mr. Vincy was more inclined to general good fellowship than to taking sides, but there was no need for him to be hasty in making any new man's acquaintance. Remember that great line from, was it Charade? With Breakfast at Tiffany's and Audrey Hepburn and Cary Grant, where he tries to flirt her up on the slopes of a mountain. And she says, I know too many people. Until I lose one, I can't possibly know anyone else. I didn't quote it correctly, but you get the gist. It's a great line. That movie's a lot of fun. And it happened that Mr. Bulstrode and Mr. Feather, nope, we went like, Mr. Wint, no, we did that. And then Mr. Vincy was more inclined to general good fellowship than to taking sides, but there was no need for him to be hasty in making any new man's acquaintance. Rosamund silently wished that her father would invite Mr. Lydgate. She was tired of the faces and figures that her father she had always been used to. The various irregular profiles and gaits and turns of phrase distinguishing those Middlemarch young men whom she had known as boys. She had been at school with girls of higher position, whose brother she felt sure it would have been possible for her to be more interested in than in those inevitable Middlemarch companions. But she would not have chosen to mention her wish to her father, and he, for his part, was in no hurry on the subject. An alderman about to be mayor must by and by enlarge his dinner parties. But at present, there were plenty of guests at his well-spread table. So that's another interesting thing that maybe first-time readers to Victorian literature or earlier literature may not entirely understand, is that it costs a lot of money to be wealthy. I'm talking about the 19th century. I don't know how much it costs to be wealthy today. I know wealthy people are given stuff all the time. Like, they've got money, but people keep giving them things, so then they don't spend the money, so they just end up with more. There I go, talking through burps. They end up with more and more money. And then what happens? Like, when I've asked this question before and everybody says it's power, and maybe that's the answer, but I'll ask it here too. Like, what is the currency? There's lots of different kinds of currency. So there's the currency that we have, which in America are dollars, or Bitcoin if you're cool. And I don't entirely understand the word fungible. Something means something means something. A rose is a rose is a rose. Gertrude Stein was one of our finest economists. But money is for the middle class. There's a point where you have all the money. You have billions of, it may not be liquid, but you have billions in assets. So money isn't the issue at that point. Or money isn't valuable at that point. You can't, like, if you want something from another rich person, giving them more money isn't going to do it because they've already got it. But if you have information, if you have power, if you have access, and if you have connections, that becomes, I think, the secret currency that lays on top of money in a capitalistic society, which is what we live in. And boy, we shouldn't. Capitalism is gross, and it hurts. It hurts everyone except the people who do well by capitalism. So, and that's the problem, because the people who do well by capitalism also have access to that secret other currency. And you and I got to work for the dollar. You and me. No, because I have to work for the dollar. I know grammar via tricks, not grammar via the logic of it, because there's no logic to grammar. It's what we want it to be. It's rules we made up, and they change all the time. But I know that if you, like in the sentence, that package is for Joe and I, is incorrect, because you wouldn't say that package is for I, you would say that package is for me. So the sentence would become, that package is for Joe and me. There you go. I'm giving you a lot. Such a giver. Actually, I am an INFJ, according to my friend Patricia, who had me take a Myers-Briggs test, which is just, it's astrology for people who don't believe in astrology. But it also seems true. Like advocate fits pretty well. I'm also a Libra. That fits pretty well. But I bet if I were anything else, I would think, oh, it fits pretty well. Except Cancer. I'm not a Cancer. I'm also not a Virgo. My mom was a Virgo. Where are we? Okay. An alderman about to be mayor must by and by enlarge his dinner parties, which is why it costs so much money to be rich, because you got to keep giving dinners and dances and balls and, I mean, dances, not, family chat. The table often remained covered with the relics of the family breakfast long after Mr. Vincy had gone with his second son to the warehouse, and when Miss Morgan was already far on in morning lessons with the younger girls in the school. We can assume Miss Morgan is a governess. It awaited the family laggard who found any sort of inconvenience to others less disagreeable than getting up when he was called. That, by the way, was my husband for quite a while. So we've been together, it'll be 19 years later this month. We met in 2001. So he once tried to tell me that they would hold a plane at the airport because they would know we weren't there yet when everybody had checked in. And to this day, I love him so deeply. I'm just going to be in love with him the rest of my life. And the next life, probably, because I just think he's that great of a person. That's the dumbest thing he's ever said. It's not the dumbest thing he's ever said. He once tried to tell me that ants could lick asserts. Ants don't have tongues. Back to Middlemarch. This was the case one morning of the October in which we have lately seen Mr. Casaubon visiting the Grange, and though the room was a little overheated with the fire, which had sent the spaniel panting to a remote corner, Rosamund, for some reason, continued to sit at her embroidery longer than usual, now and then giving herself a little shake and laying her work on her knee to contemplate it with an air of hesitating wariness. Her mamma, who had returned from an excursion to the kitchen, sat on the other side of the table, sat at the other side of the small work table with an air of more entire placidity, until the clock again giving notice that it was going to strike, she looked up from the lace mending which was occupying her plump fingers and rang the bell. Knock at Mr. Fred's door again, Pritchard, and tell him that it is 10:30. This was said without any change in the radiant good humor of Miss Vincy's face, in which 45 years had delved neither This was said without any change in the so I read that line wrong. This is what happens with sight reading. So let's try that again. She looked up from the lace mending, which was occupying her plump fingers, and rang the bell. Knock at Mr. Fred's door again, Pritchard, and tell him that it has struck 10:30. This was said without any change in the radiant good humor of Mrs. Vincy's face, in which 45 years had delved neither angles nor parallels. It's always weird to read about older people and then find out, oh, they're my age. I'm this older person. And you can't tell young people about it. They won't get it. Not until they go through it. Like, we keep trying to explain things to young people that they're not going to get because they have to go through it. We're not going to be able to save them from these experiences. It's these experiences that make us who we are. So stop talking to young people. They have their own language now and something called TikTok. This was said without any change in the radiant good humor of Mrs. Vincy's face, in which 45 years had delved neither angles nor parallels, and pushing back her pink cap string, she let her work rest on her lap while she looked admiringly at her daughter. "Mamma," said Rosamund, "when Fred comes down, I wish you would not let him have red herrings. I cannot bear the smell of them all over the house at this hour of the morning." "Oh, my dear, you are so hard on your brothers. It is the only fault I have to find with you. You are the sweetest temper in the world, but you are so tetchy with your brothers." "Not tetchy, mamma. You never hear me speak in any unladylike way." "Oh, but you want to deny them things." "Brothers are so unpleasant." "Not true. I love my brother a lot. But I'm also not a sister." Oh, my dear, you must allow for young men." "Okay, yeah, no, we must not allow for young men. We have allowed for young men for a long time, and young men aren't going to be good at currently. Some point in the future, this may be different. But in today's America, in today's world, young men are forgiven a lot. Boys will be boys. Um, "Oh, my dear, you must allow for young men. Be thankful if they have good hearts. A woman must learn to put up with little things. You will be married some day. Well, not to anyone who is like Fred. Don't decry your own brother, my dear. Few young men have less against them, although he couldn't take his degree. I'm sure I can't understand why, for he seems to me most clever. And you know yourself he was thought equal to the best at college. So particular as you are, my dear, I wonder you are not glad to have such a gentlemanly young man for a brother. You are always finding fault with Bob because he is not Fred." "Oh, no, mamma, only because he is Bob." "Oh, my dear, you will not find any Middlemarch young man who has not something against him. But," here Rosamund's face broke into a smile which suddenly revealed two dimples. She herself thought unfavorably of these dimples and smiled little in general society. "But I shall not marry any Middlemarch young man." "So it seems, my love, for you have as good as refused the pick of them. And if there's better to be had, I'm sure there's no girl better deserves it." "Excuse me, mamma, I wish you would not say the pick of them." "Why, what else are they?" "I mean, mamma, it is a vulgar expression." "Very likely, my dear. I never was a good speaker. What should I say?" "The best of them." "Why, that seems just as plain and common. If I had time to think, I should have said the most superior young men, but with your education, you must know." "What must Rosie know, mother?" said Mr. Fred, who had slid in unobserved through the half-open door while the ladies were bending over their work, and now going up to the fire, stood with his back towards it, warming the soles of his slippers. "Whether it's right to say superior young men," said Mrs. Vincy, ringing the bell. "Oh, there are so many superior teas and sugars now. Superior is getting to be shopkeeper's slang." "Are you beginning to dislike slang, then?" said Rosamund with mild gravity. "Only the worst sort. All choice of word is slang. It marks a class." That's interesting too. Language does mark, and for a long time we've used I will stop burping, as God is my witness. For a long time, we've used language, specifically English, and specifically white English, as a shibboleth. And if so, shibboleth is a term or a phrase. It's like a password. If you can't actually, hi, why don't we? Because it's really interesting. So let's share the screen again. Let's go back to Wikipedia and do shibboleth. Is any custom or tradition usually a choice of phrasing or even a single word that distinguishes one group of people from another? Shibboleths have been used throughout history in many societies as passwords, simple ways of self-identification signaling loyalty and affinity, maintaining traditional segregation, or protecting from real or perceived threats. So, circumcision is a shibboleth. It was a way for Jews to mark themselves, for early Jews, well, for all. Cut. Start again. Circumcision is a shibboleth, and it is that because it was a practice that Jews used to separate themselves from other tribes in the area. If you were circumcised, you were Jewish. If you were not circumcised, you were not Jewish, and that was a shibboleth. Also, well, here we go. The term originates with the Hebrew word, I'm not going to try to say it, but it's shibboleth, which literally means the part of a plant containing grain, such as the head of a stalk of wheat or rye, or less commonly, but arguably more appositely, flood or torrent. The modern use derives from an account in the Hebrew Bible. Good job, Wikipedia. We don't say Old Testament, we don't say New Testament. We say Hebrew Bible and we say Christian Bible. They are two separate Bibles, in which pronunciation of this word was used to distinguish Ephraimites from whose dialect used differently sounding first consonant. The difference concerns the Hebrew letter shin, which is now pronounced as, oh Lord. Okay, I'm going to stop reading this, but you get the idea. You're smart people. That's why you're listening to Middlemarch. Anyway, language is that. And so as certain terms, and kids use it too, to figure out who's cool or not. Like when adults start using slang that originated with teens, and almost universally originates with Black teens in America. Black teens are incredible innovators of language. And then we denigrate Black teens and kill them, but we take the words that they use because we like the way they sound, because they make us feel super cool. So, America. Here we go. Are you beginning to dislike slang then, said Rosamund with mild gravity. Only the wrong sort. All choice of words is slang. It marks a class. There is correct English. That is not slang. I beg your pardon. Correct English is the slang of prigs who write history and essays, and the strongest slang of all is the slang of poets. The strongest slang of all today is academic slang. So there's an academic way of writing that completely separates readers from ideas and is only recognizable to others within that milieu. So all this stuff, I'm not smart enough. I'm not one of those people. And maybe that's why I don't like it. Maybe if I were one of those people, I would be that insufferable. In fact, I'm almost positive I would be. But yeah, academic writing is, it needs an overhaul. It needs to not be occluded by these giant terms of art that make no sense. There was I read I think somebody was critiquing a book and they said, this does nothing to trouble the idea of womanhood. And I thought, oh, but I'm old. That's something else I have to keep in mind. Some of the language isn't for me. Some of the language can be appreciated by me, but it's not for me. And white people have a tough time with that. We have a tough time accepting the idea that something might not be for us, because up until still, everything has been for us. So when we reach those places, we get really uncomfortable all of a sudden. The word white encompasses, it's like an umbrella. And then there are like cis is in there. Cis people, very uncomfortable with the word cis because they don't like the idea that there needs to be a word to describe them because they've just always been normal. Straight, that's, people are less uncomfortable being called straight than they are being called cis. In fact, a lot of people actively insist on being called straight. And a lot of gay guys like to say, I'm straight acting, because that's sort of their golden ticket into, they feel more of society. It's not true. But anyway, boy, we're going all over the place today. I am bipolar. And we're coming out of that. Like, I'm coming out of a bipolar spell. And so there's a little bit of the manic sort of working its way out of my system, is how I would describe it. In fact, I prefer the term manic depressive rather than bipolar, because bipolar sounds like something a battery is. And manic depressive sort of really describes what it feels like in my body. Like, I go from wild activity to sobbing on my bed for things that are not my fault, but I have somehow found a way to make them my fault. I'm really good at taking credit for things I didn't do. So I'm like, okay, no editing, but I do need to pause for 1 second because I have to blow my nose, and you don't want to see that, so hold on 1 second. Time is weird because for you, no time has passed, and for me, several minutes have passed. I also got my water. Let's get back to this chapter. I beg your pardon. Correct English is the slang of prigs who write history and essays, and the strongest slang of all is the slang of poets. You will say anything, Fred, to get your point. Well, tell me whether it is slang or poetry to call an ox a leg plater. That Norton decides to footnote. Lowering system, Norton doesn't decide to footnote. Norton, I don't think they're going to look at this. Comes from the way cows walk, or ox walk. Okay. Of course you can call it poetry if you like. Aha, Miss Rosie. You don't know Homer from slang. I shall invent a new game. I shall write bits of slang and poetry on slips and give them to you to separate. Dear me, how amusing it is to hear you young people talk, said Mrs. Vincy with cheerful admiration. Have you got nothing else for my breakfast, Pritchard? Said Fred to the servant who brought in coffee and buttered toast while he walked round the table, surveying the ham, potted beef, and other cold remnants with an air of silent rejection and polite forbearance from signs of disgust. Should you like eggs, sir? Eggs, no. Bring me a grilled bone. Really, Fred, said Rosamund when the servant had left the room, if you must have hot things for breakfast, I wish you would come down earlier. You can get up at 6 o'clock to go out hunting. I cannot understand why you find it so difficult to get up on mornings, to get up on other mornings. Well, that is your want of understanding, Rosie. I can get up to go hunting because I like it. What would you think of me if I came down 2 hours after everyone else and ordered grilled bone? I should think you were an uncommonly fast young lady, said Fred, eating his toast with the utmost composure. I cannot see why brothers are to make themselves disagreeable any more than sisters. I don't make myself disagreeable. It is you who find me so. Disagreeable is a word that describes your feelings and not my actions. Disagreeable is a word that describes your feelings and not my. Oh, yeah, that's interesting to think about. Like, how often do we use language that's really descriptive of what we're feeling to um, sort of castigate someone else? I think it describes the smell of grilled bone. Oh, not at all. It describes a sensation in your life. Sorry, not at all. It describes a sensation in your little nose associated with certain finicking notions, which are the classics of Mrs. Lemon's school. Look at my mother. You don't see her objecting to everything except what she does herself. She is my notion of a pleasant woman. Bless you both, my dears, and don't quarrel, said Mrs. Vincy with motherly cordiality. Come, Fred, tell us all about the new doctor. How is your uncle pleased with him? Pretty well, I think. He asks Lydgate all sorts of questions and then screws up his face while he hears the answer as if they were pinching his toes. That's his way. Ah, here comes my grilled bone. But how came you to stay out so late, my dear? You only said you were going to your uncle's. Oh, I dined at Plymdale's. We had whist. Lydgate was there too. And what do you think of him? He is very gentlemanly, I suppose. They say he is of an excellent family, his relations quite country people. Yes, said Fred. There was a Lydgate at John's who spent no end of money. I find this man is a second cousin of his, but rich men have very poor devils for second cousins. It always makes a difference, though, to be of a good family, said Rosamund, with a tone of decision which showed that she had thought on this subject. Rosamund felt that she might have been happier if she had not been the daughter of a Middlemarch manufacturer. She disliked anything which reminded her that her mother's father had been an innkeeper. So, boy, was my face really close to the camera. That's going to look terrible. I don't care. When I have lectured about or taught 19th century literature, a difficult concept to get across clearly is what the class system is like, because in England, the class system was very explicit, and in America, the class system has been, for the most part, sort of ignored. We pretend to be a classless society, and that's just not the case. But like, what job you had really affected your position in society. And so maybe a way to think about it today is where, if you're a college graduate, that's one thing. So that's one step up. But where you went to college makes a big deal. So if you have a degree from Harvard, Princeton, that means more than a degree from DeVry University. And it means more than no degree at all. If you have a degree from a community college, that is considered less than. I'm not saying it is less than. It is not less than. There's a great comedian who has a whole joke about how they don't not teach you things, the same things at community colleges. So it's sort of interesting how schools get reputations, and maybe it's because they attract better teachers, but I don't know, teaching is a losing game. What are we paying them? 10 cents an hour now? Is that how much a teacher makes? I don't know. Is it by the piece? Let's see. It always makes a difference, though, to be of a good family, said Rosamund, with a tone of decision which showed she had thought on the subject. Rosamund felt that she might have been happier if she had not been the daughter of a Middlemarch manufacturer. She disliked anything which reminded her that her mother's father had been an innkeeper. Certainly, anyone remembering the fact might think that Mrs. Vincy had the air of a very handsome, good-humored landlady, accustomed to the capricious orders of gentlemen. I thought it was odd his name was Tertius, said the bright-faced matron. But of course it's a name in the family. But now, tell us exactly what sort of man he is. Oh, tallish, dark, clever, talks well, rather a prig, I think. I never can make out what you mean by a prig, said Rosamund. A fellow who wants to show that he has opinions, and I'm a prig. Why, my dear, doctors must have opinions, said Mrs. Vincy. What are they there for? Yes, mother, the opinions they are paid for. But a prig is a fellow who is always making you a present of his opinions. I suppose Mary Garth admires Mr. Lydgate, said Rosamund, not without a touch of innuendo. Oh, really, I can't say, said Fred rather glumly, as he left the table and taking up a novel which he had brought down with him, threw himself into an armchair. Or if you are jealous of her, go oftener to Stone Court yourself and eclipse her. I wish you would not be so vulgar, Fred. If you have finished, pray ring the bell. It is true, though, what your brother says, Rosamund, Mrs. Vincy began when the servant had cleared the table. It is 1,000 pities you hadn't patience to go and see your uncle more, so proud of you as he is, and wanted you to live with him. There's no knowing what he might have done for you as well as for Fred. God knows I'm fond of having you at home with me, but I can part with my children for their good. And now it stands to reason that your Uncle Featherstone will do something for Mary Garth. Mary Garth can bear being at Stone Court because she likes that better than being a governess, said Rosamund, folding up her work. I would rather not have anything left to me if I must earn it by enduring much of my uncle's cough and his ugly relations. We can't be long for this world, my dear. I wouldn't hasten his end. But what with asthma and that inward complaint, I don't know what that might be. Let us hope there is something better for him in another. And I have no ill will towards Mary Garth, but there's justice to be thought of. And Mr. Featherstone's first wife brought him no money as my sister did. Her nieces and nephews can't have so much claim as my sisters. And I must say, I think Mary Garth a dreadful plain girl, more fit for a governess. Everyone would not agree with you there, mother, said Fred, who seemed to be able to read and listen too. Well, my dear, said Mrs. Vincy, wheeling skillfully, if she had some fortune left her. A man marries his wife's relations, and the Garths are so poor and live in such a small way. But I shall leave you to your studies, my dear, for I must go and do some shopping. Fred's studies are not very deep, said Rosamund, rising with her mamma. He is only reading a novel. Well, by and by he'll go to his Latin and things, said Mrs. Vincy, soothingly stroking her son's head. There's a fire in the smoking room on purpose. It's your father's wish, you know, Fred, my dear, and I always tell him you will be good and go to college again to take your degree. Fred drew his mother's hand down to his lips, but said nothing. I suppose you're not going out riding today, said Rosamund, lingering a little after Mamma was gone. No. Why? Papa says I may have the chestnut to ride now. You can go with me tomorrow if you like. Only I'm going to Stone Court, remember. I want the ride so much, it is indifferent to me where we go. Rosamund really wished to go to Stone. Oh, let's try that again. I want the ride so much, it is indifferent to me where we go. Rosamund really wished to go to Stone Court, of all other places. Oh, I say, Rosie, said Fred as he was passing out of the room, if you are going to the piano, let me come and play some airs with you. Pray do not ask this morning. Why not this morning? Really, Fred, I wish you would leave off playing the flute. A man looks very silly playing the flute, and you play so out of tune. When next anyone makes love to you in the Miss Rosamund. I will tell him how obliging you are. Why should you expect me to oblige you by hearing you play the flute, any more than I should expect you to oblige me by not playing it? And why should you expect me to take you out riding? This question led to an adjustment, for Rosamund had set her mind on that particular ride. So Fred was gratified with nearly an hour's practice of sorry, I'm pausing only because I don't know how to say these words. Arhidinos, Ebanks and Barres, and other favorite airs from his instructor on the flute. And of course, Norton didn't bother to footnote that because why let people know things? A wheezy performance into which he threw much ambition and an irrepressible hopefulness. And we did it. We got through chapter 11. We have chapter 12 next. We're 66 pages in my edition. Oh boy. Oh boy. In chapter 12, which we will do, I'll say tomorrow, not promising tomorrow. We'll see how I feel. Chapter 12 is a long and it ends book 1. So that's an accomplishment. But we will celebrate when it happens and not before. I am your good friend, Mike Bevel. I'm not as sweaty now, I guess. Thank you for spending a lot of time with me today. And I will see you next time when we read chapter 12. This has been Footnotes, and I am saying goodbye, and I'm doing that thing.